The sun hung merciless over the New Mexico territory in August of 1877, turning the air thick as wool. And Penelope Morgan had been walking for 3 hours with nothing but dried lips and the weight of her dead husband's revolver in her satchel. The landscape stretched endless in every direction, all sand and scrub brush and rocks that shimmered with heat, and her feet hurt something fierce in the worn leather boots that had belonged to her mother. She had left the wagon train 2 days back after the fever took Robert, her husband of 8 months, and she could not bear the pitying looks from the other families anymore. They had been heading to California, full of promises about gold and new beginnings, but all Penelope had found was a shallow grave outside Santa Fe, and the realization that she was utterly alone in a world that cared nothing for women without protection. The ranch appeared like a mirage at first, shimmering in the distance where the land dipped into a shallow valley. She blinked hard, certain her eyes were playing tricks, but the structure remained solid as she kept walking. A modest house built from adobe, a barn that had seen better days, and corrals that stretched out behind it all. What caught her attention most, though, was the green. In all this brown wasteland, there was actual green grass in patches near the buildings, which meant only one thing: water. Her pace quickened despite her exhaustion, and she stumbled once on the uneven ground, catching herself with her hands. The skin on her palms split against the sharp rocks, but she barely felt it. Water meant survival. Water meant another day of living. Water meant she might actually make it to the next town, wherever that was. As she got closer, she saw the man. He was standing near the barn, stripped to the waist in the brutal heat, working on fixing a section of fence. His skin was bronze dark from years under the sun, and his hair was the color of wheat left too long in the field, lightened almost white in places. Even from a distance, she could see the muscles in his back flex as he hammered a post into the ground. He had not noticed her yet, too focused on his work, and for a moment Penelope hesitated. She had heard stories about what happened to women alone out here. The Wild West was not kind to anyone, but it was especially unkind to those without power. Still, she had no choice. Without water, she would be dead by tomorrow, and death from thirst was supposed to be one of the worst ways to go. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice coming out scratchy and weak. The man spun around fast, dropping his hammer and reaching for something she could not quite see. When he turned fully, she noticed the gun belt hanging on the fence post within easy reach, and his hand hovered near it even as his eyes took her in. He was younger than she expected, probably no more than 25 or 26. His face was all hard angles, with a strong jaw covered in several days of stubble and eyes that were the startling blue-green of deep water. Those eyes narrowed as he studied her, taking in her dusty dress, her sunburned face, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "Madam," he said carefully, his hand still near that gun. "You are a long way from anywhere, I know," Penelope managed. Her tongue felt too thick in her mouth. "I am sorry to intrude, I was hoping. I need water, please. I have been walking since dawn." Something shifted in his expression, the wariness giving way to concern. He grabbed his shirt from where it hung on the fence and shrugged it on, not bothering to button it, then moved toward her with long strides. Up close, he was taller than she had realized, and she had to tilt her head back to look at his face. "You are burning up," he said, and before she could respond, he had placed a hand on her forehead. His palm was rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle. "How long have you been out here without water?" "I had some this morning, a little. It ran out around midday." He cursed under his breath, words she pretended not to hear, then wrapped an arm around her waist. "Come on, let us get you inside." Penelope wanted to protest that she was fine, that she could walk on her own, but the truth was the world had started spinning in a slow, sickening circle. She leaned against him, grateful for the solid warmth of his body, and let him guide her toward the house. The interior was blessedly cool, the thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. He led her to a chair at a rough-hewn table and eased her down into it, then moved to a cabinet and pulled out a tin cup. She watched through half-closed eyes as he went to a bucket and ladled water into the cup, then brought it to her. "Slow," he warned as she reached for it. "I know you want to gulp it down, but you will make yourself sick. Small sips." It took every ounce of willpower she possessed to obey, but she did. The water was cool and tasted faintly of minerals and earth, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever experienced. She took tiny sips, letting each one sit in her mouth before swallowing, and gradually the fog in her head began to clear. The man had stepped back and was watching her with those remarkable eyes. Now that she was not on the verge of collapse, she could study him properly. He had an interesting face, not handsome in the classical sense but compelling. There was something about the set of his mouth, the way he held himself, that spoke of loneliness. She recognized it because she had seen the same expression in her own mirror ever since Robert died. "Thank you," she said when she had drained half the cup. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You might have," he said bluntly. "This time of year, the heat kills people all the time. What are you doing walking alone in the desert?" "I was with a wagon train," was being the important word. "My husband died of fever outside Santa Fe. I could not stay with them anymore. Everyone kept looking at me like I was cursed or something." His expression softened. "I am sorry for your loss." "Are you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Everyone says that, but nobody means it. They are just being polite." For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "You are right. I did not know your husband, so I cannot truly mourn him, but I am sorry that you are hurting. I know what it is like to lose people. And I am sorry that the world is hard enough that you felt walking alone into the desert was better than staying with others." The simple honesty in his words made her throat tight. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears. "I did not expect kindness." "Then you have been around the wrong people." He stood up and went back to the bucket, refilling her cup. "My name is Thomas Calloway. This is my ranch, such as it is. You are welcome to stay as long as you need to recover. I am Penelope Morgan. Penny, really. Nobody ever calls me Penelope except my mother, and she has been dead for 3 years. She took the cup from him, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I cannot pay you. I have a little money, but I need it to get to California." "Did I ask for payment?" "No, but then do not worry about it." Thomas moved to the stove where a pot sat waiting. He stirred whatever was inside, and the smell that wafted toward her made her stomach growl audibly. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." "Maybe. Time has gotten confused." He made a disapproving sound and started ladling stew into a bowl. "You need food as much as water. This is not fancy, but it will fill your belly." The stew was rabbit and vegetables, simple but well seasoned, and Penelope had to force herself to eat slowly. Her body wanted to devour everything in sight, but she remembered his warning about making herself sick. Thomas sat across from her with his own bowl, eating in silence, and she was grateful he did not press her with questions. When she had finished, the exhaustion hit her all at once. The chair suddenly felt too hard, her body too heavy, and she could barely keep her eyes open. "There is a spare room," Thomas said, standing up and taking her empty bowl. "It is not much, but the bed is clean. You should rest." "I should not stay. I have already imposed too much." "With respect, madam, you can barely stand. You need sleep, and it will be dark soon." The desert is dangerous enough during the day. At night, it is deadly. You can decide what to do in the morning when you are thinking clearly. He had a point, though Penelope hated admitting it. She let him guide her to a small room off the main living area. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk, nothing more. The simplicity of it was somehow comforting. "Thank you," she said again. The words felt inadequate for what he was doing, but they were all she had. Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. "Rest well, Penny." He closed the door softly behind him, and she was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, her body screaming with fatigue, but her mind would not quiet. This man, this stranger, had shown her more genuine kindness in a few hours than most people had in her entire life. She did not know what to do with that. Eventually, exhaustion won. She lay down without even removing her boots and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Penelope woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. The room was unfamiliar, the bed too comfortable compared to the hard ground she had been sleeping on with the wagon train. Then it all came rushing back. The desert, the ranch, Thomas Calloway with his careful hands and sad eyes. She sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. Everything ached, but it was the normal ache of hard travel, not the dangerous pain of heat stroke or dehydration. Her lips were still cracked, her skin felt tight and dry, but she was alive and relatively well. The smell of coffee drifted under the door, rich and tempting. Her stomach growled in response. She stood, smoothing down her dress as best she could, and ventured out into the main room. Thomas was at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He had shaved since yesterday, and his hair was damp, slicked back from his face. He glanced over when he heard her, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. "You look better," he said. "How do you feel?" "Like I was dragged behind a horse for several miles, but better than yesterday." She moved to the table, unsure if she should sit or offer to help. The dynamics of being a guest in a stranger's home were complicated. "Thank you for letting me stay." It was not a problem. "Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." She obeyed, watching as he plated the eggs alongside thick slices of bread and strips of bacon. The domesticity of the scene was oddly soothing. When he set the plate in front of her, she noticed his hands again. They were scarred in places, the nails broken and rough, hands that knew hard work intimately. "You run this ranch alone?" she asked as he sat down with his own plate. "Yes. I had a couple of hands helping for a while, but they moved on last year. It is hard to find good workers who want to stay in the middle of nowhere." He cut into his eggs, and the yolk ran golden across his plate. "I have about 200 head of cattle, some horses. It is enough to keep me busy." "It must be lonely." The words were out before she could stop them, too personal for someone she barely knew, but Thomas did not seem offended. He just nodded slowly. "It is. But I got used to it. After a while, you start to prefer the silence." "What brought you out here? The war?" He said it simply, as if those two words explained everything, and maybe they did. The Civil War had ended 12 years ago, but its shadows still stretched long across the country. "I came back to Missouri and found out my parents had died of cholera while I was gone. My sister moved east with her husband. There was nothing left for me there, so I came west and found this land. Nobody wanted it because it is so remote, which suited me fine." Penelope understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. After Robert died, she had craved isolation too, wanted to escape the constant press of people and their expectations. "What made you start the ranch?" "Needed something to do, needed a purpose." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. "Cattle are simple. They do not ask questions or have expectations. You feed them, protect them, and they survive or they do not. It is honest work. Do you ever regret it, being out here alone?" His gaze shifted to her, and the intensity in those blue-green eyes made her breath catch. Sometimes, especially in winter when the wind howls and the snow piles up and you can go weeks without seeing another soul. But then spring comes, and the grass turns green, and the cattle have calves, and it feels like maybe there is a reason for it all. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and Penelope helped him wash the dishes in a basin of water he pumped from a well just outside the back door. The well was deep and clearly well maintained, and she understood now why his land was green when everything around it was brown. "You have a spring," she said, watching the water flow clear and cold from the pump. "Yes, that is why I chose this spot. The previous owner did not realize what he had. He thought it was just a little seep, not worth much. But I dug down and found a whole underground spring. It has never run dry, not even in the worst droughts." Pride crept into his voice. "This water is the lifeblood of the ranch. Without it, none of this would be possible." Penelope thought about that as they worked. Water was survival out here, more valuable than gold or silver. Thomas had found a treasure, and he had built his entire life around it. Something about that struck her as deeply romantic, though she could not quite articulate why. When the dishes were done, Thomas turned to her with an expression that was almost hesitant. "I need to ride out and check on the cattle today. You are welcome to come along if you feel up to it, or you can stay here and rest. Either way is fine." The idea of staying alone in the house felt strange, and besides, Penelope had been sitting or lying down for the better part of a day. Her body craved movement. "I would like to come if you do not mind." "I do not mind at all." He saddled 2 horses, a big bay gelding for himself and a smaller paint mare for her. The mare had gentle eyes and stood patiently while Penelope mounted, adjusting her skirts as modestly as possible. It had been years since she had ridden, not since she was a girl back in Ohio, but the skill came back quickly. They rode out across the rangeland, and Penelope could not help but marvel at the landscape. In the harsh light of midday yesterday, everything had looked dead and hostile. Now, in the softer morning sun, she could see the beauty in it. The way the mesas rose in the distance, layered in shades of red and orange. The scraggly piñon trees that dotted the landscape. The vast expanse of sky that seemed to go on forever. Thomas rode easily beside her, comfortable in the saddle in a way that spoke of years of practice. He pointed out landmarks as they went. A distinctive rock formation that he used as a boundary marker, an arroyo where the cattle liked to shelter from the wind, a stand of cottonwoods that marked another water source on his property. "You have a lot of land," she observed. 640 acres, a square mile. "I filed a homestead claim when I first came out here, then bought the adjacent land from a fellow who could not make a go of it. It is not the biggest ranch in the territory, but it is mine, free and clear." They found the cattle scattered across a wide meadow, grazing on the sparse grass. Thomas counted them with a practiced eye, looking for any that might be injured or sick. Penelope watched him work, noting the careful attention he paid to each animal, the way he spoke softly to them when he rode close. This was a man who took his responsibilities seriously, who cared for things under his protection. "How did you end up heading to California?" he asked as they sat on their horses watching the herd. "What were you and your husband looking for?" Penelope hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. He had shared his story, she could share hers. Robert had heard there was opportunity in California. "Farmland," he said. "A chance to build something." He had been a clerk back in Illinois and he hated it, wanted to work with his hands, grow things. "I thought it sounded like a good dream." "But you did not love him." It was not a question, and Penelope felt her cheeks heat. "How did you, the way you talk about him? Like he was an acquaintance, not a husband. And you walked away from the wagon train instead of continuing to California. If you were desperate to fulfill his dream, you would have stayed. She looked down at her hands on the reins. You are right. I did not love him. He was kind and he offered marriage when I needed it. My father had died, left debts. Robert paid them off and married me. I was grateful. I thought maybe love would come later. But it did not. No, we were polite strangers who shared a bed. And now he is dead and I feel guilty because I am sad but not devastated. I should be devastated, should I not? But mostly I just feel lost. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. Grief is strange. It does not follow rules. You can mourn what you lost without having loved him the way people think you should have. You had a plan, a future, even if it was not the one you would have chosen. Now that is gone. That is worth mourning. His words settled something in her chest that had been tangled and confused. Thank you for understanding. I know what it is like to do things because they need to be done, not because you want to. War teaches you that real quick. And I know what it is like to lose a future you thought you had. Maybe not the same, but similar enough. They rode back to the ranch as the sun climbed higher, and Penelope found herself not wanting the morning to end. There was something peaceful about being out here with Thomas, something that felt almost like belonging. It was a dangerous feeling for someone who needed to keep moving to find her own way, but she could not quite suppress it. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Penelope would wake to find Thomas already up, making coffee and preparing breakfast. They would eat together, talking about small things, safe things. Then they would work. He taught her how to mend fences, how to check the cattle for signs of disease, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, painting the desert in impossible shades of gold and crimson. She should have moved on. Every morning, Penelope told herself today would be the day she would ask Thomas for directions to the nearest town and start walking again. But every morning, he would give her that small smile when she appeared for breakfast, and she would think maybe one more day would not hurt. It was on the fifth night, as they sat on the porch with the stars emerging overhead like scattered diamonds, that Thomas finally asked the question she had been dreading. When are you planning to leave? Penelope's hands tightened on the cup of coffee she held. I should have left days ago. I have been imposing on your hospitality far too long. That is not what I asked. She turned to look at him. He was leaning back in his chair, his face in shadow, but she could feel his eyes on her. I do not know. I should go, but she stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. You do not want to, he finished for her. No, I do not want to, and that terrifies me. Why? Because I barely know you. Because I just lost my husband 5 weeks ago and I should not be feeling, whatever this is. Because I have nowhere to go and nothing to offer, and staying here feels like taking advantage of your kindness. Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his face came into the light from the window behind them. His expression was serious, but there was something warm in his eyes. What if I do not want you to leave? Her breath caught. Thomas, I know it has only been a few days. I know you are grieving and lost and probably not thinking clearly. But I have to be honest with you, Penny. Having you here has reminded me what it is like to not be alone. I had forgotten how good it feels to share meals with someone, to have another person to talk to hear another voice besides my own. And it is more than that. I like you. I like the way you throw yourself into learning new things, the way you are not afraid of hard work, the way you laugh when the chickens chase you around the yard. You saw that. She had thought he was out with the cattle. I saw it, and it was the best thing I have seen in years. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. I am not asking you to make any promises. I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. But if you want to stay longer, if you want to see where this might go, I would like that very much." Penelope looked down at their joined hands. She should say no. She should protect her heart, protect his heart, walk away before this became more complicated. But when she tried to imagine leaving, riding away from this ranch and never seeing Thomas again, something in her chest ached. "I am scared," she whispered. "Me too. It has been a long time since I let myself want anything beyond just surviving. You make me want more, and that is terrifying. But maybe that is okay. Maybe being scared means it is important." She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "One more week. Let me stay one more week, and then we can see." "One more week," he agreed, and the smile that crossed his face was like sunrise. That week stretched into 2, then 3. Summer began its slow slide into autumn, and the brutal heat eased into something more bearable. Penelope learned the rhythms of the ranch, learned how Thomas liked his coffee in the morning and how he always checked the horses before bed. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, would wake in the darkness and walk outside to stare at the stars until he was calm again. She learned that he was handy with woodworking, that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching, that he had a terrible singing voice but hummed while he worked anyway. And Thomas learned her too. He learned that she was afraid of thunder but not lightning, that she had wanted to be a teacher before her father's debts changed everything, that she could shoot a rifle better than most men. He learned that she cried sometimes when she thought she was alone, still processing the grief and confusion of everything that had happened. He learned that she was stubborn and proud and scared of being a burden. They grew comfortable with each other in small ways. A hand on the small of her back when he passed behind her in the kitchen. Her fingers brushing his when she handed him things. The way they stood just a little closer than necessary when working side by side. They were dancing around something larger, both afraid to name it, but it was there between them like a living thing. It was late September when everything shifted. They had been working on repairing the barn roof, and Penelope had been holding the ladder steady while Thomas worked above. He was reaching for something, stretched out too far, when the old wood under his feet gave way with a crack. Penelope screamed his name as he fell, and she tried to catch him, to break his fall somehow. They both went down in a tangle of limbs, and pain shot through her shoulder as she hit the ground. But Thomas had landed mostly on her instead of the hard, packed earth, and that had probably saved him from serious injury. For a moment, they just lay there, stunned. Then Thomas pushed himself up on his elbows, his face inches from hers, and she could see the fear in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Penny, are you hurt?" She took stock of her body. Her shoulder throbbed, and she would definitely have bruises, but nothing felt broken. "I am okay. Are you?" "I am fine, but you could have been killed. Why did you try to catch me? What was I supposed to do? Let you break your neck? Better than you getting hurt." His voice was rough, and his hands came up to frame her face. "Do you understand? I could not bear it if something happened to you. Thomas, I love you." The words burst out of him like they had been held back too long. "I know it is too soon. I know you are not ready to hear it, but I fell off a roof, and all I could think was, what if I die and I never told you? I love you, Penny. I think I started loving you that first day when you stumbled into my life sunburned and half dead and still trying to be polite. You asked for water, and I want to give you so much more than that. I want to give you the spring and this ranch and everything I have. I want to give you my whole world if you will take it." Tears were streaming down her face, and she did not know when she had started crying. "It is too soon. We have barely known each other 2 months. This is crazy, I know. Robert has only been dead 12 weeks. I am probably just confused and grateful, and I know. But I love you too." The words felt like jumping off a cliff. "I do not understand it. It does not make sense. but I wake up happy because I know I get to see you. I go to sleep content because you are nearby. When you smile at me, my whole chest feels warm. And when you fell, all I could think was that I could not lose you, not when I just found you. Thomas lowered his forehead to rest against hers, his eyes closed, his breath shaky. Tell me I am not dreaming. You are not dreaming. Neither am I, though this feels impossible. The best things usually are. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious. Penelope kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his neck, and it felt like coming home. It felt like every choice that had led her here, every hardship and loss had been pointing toward this moment. This man. This love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas helped her to her feet. Her shoulder was definitely going to hurt tomorrow, but she could not bring herself to care. Everything had changed, shifted into a new configuration that felt both terrifying and exactly right. So what do we do now? She asked. Whatever you want. You can stay and we can see where this goes. Or if you still want to go to California, I will take you there. I will give you the money for passage, make sure you are safe. I meant what I said, Penny. I love you, which means I want what is best for you, even if that means letting you go. She looked around at the ranch, at the land she had come to know these past weeks. She thought about California, about the vague dream Robert had chased. Then she looked at Thomas, at the man who had shown her more genuine care and affection in 2 months than she had known in her whole life. I want to stay, she said. If you will have me, I want to stay and build a life here, with you. The smile that crossed his face was brighter than the sun. He picked her up and spun her around, and she laughed despite the pain in her shoulder. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and hope. You will not regret it, he said against her lips. I swear to you I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Just be yourself. That is all I need. They went inside to clean up, and Thomas insisted on checking her shoulder thoroughly. There was a large bruise forming, purple and tender, but nothing was broken. He made her sit while he prepared dinner, and they ate together as the sun set, planning their future in broad strokes. We should do it properly, Thomas said. I should court you, take you to town, let people see us together. Then when enough time has passed, we can get married, if you want that. I do want that, though I do not need a long courtship. I know my heart. The town will talk either way. A widow remarrying so quickly. They will say things. Penelope reached across the table and took his hand. Let them talk. I have spent too much of my life worrying about what people think. I am done with that. If we want to get married next month or next year, that should be our choice. Next month seems fast. Thomas Calloway, you just told me you wanted to give me your entire world. Do not get shy on me now, he laughed, a real laugh that lit up his whole face. You are right. I have been alone too long to waste time being proper about this. What do you say to 6 weeks? That will give us time to plan a little to make sure this is what you really want. I know it is what I want, but 6 weeks sounds reasonable. It will be late October. The heat will be gone. And we can make a trip into town in the next few days, get you a proper dress if you want one. Introduce you to the priest or the preacher, whoever you prefer. There is a town nearby, about a day's ride. It is not much, just a few buildings and a general store, but it has what we need. I do not go often, but I should have taken you before now. You have been isolated out here. I have not minded the isolation. Neither have I, but we should do this right. For you, if not for me. They made the trip to town 3 days later. The settlement was called Stillwater, a generous name for what amounted to a main street with a dozen buildings scattered along it. There was a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a small church at the end of the road. The population could not have been more than 50 people, and every one of them seemed to find an excuse to come out and stare at Thomas and the woman with him. The attention made Penelope uncomfortable, but Thomas kept a steady hand at her back as they walked into the general store. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with a beard that reached his chest, looked up from the counter and his eyes went wide. "Thomas Calloway, as I live and breathe. I have not seen you in near 6 months. Thought maybe you had died out there. Still alive, Henry. Doing well, actually. I wanted to introduce you to someone. This is Penny Morgan. She is staying at the ranch." Henry's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, but to his credit, he did not say anything inappropriate. "Madam, it is a pleasure. What brings you folks into town? We need a few things. Some fabric, if you have anything suitable for a dress. And we want to speak with the preacher about performing a marriage." The words dropped into the room like stones into a still pond. Henry's jaw actually dropped open, and Penelope heard someone behind them gasp. She resisted the urge to turn around and see who it was. A marriage. Well, that is certainly news. Henry recovered quickly, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Congratulations to you both. As it happens, I have some lovely fabric that came in on the last supply wagon. Let me show you." They spent the next hour selecting fabric, discussing plans, and enduring the curious stares of what felt like the entire town. By the time they left, Penelope was exhausted from the social interaction, but she also felt oddly proud. Thomas had introduced her as his future wife, had stood beside her with his head high despite the whispers. He was not ashamed of her or of their unconventional situation. They met with the preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, who agreed to perform the ceremony with only a few perfunctory questions about her previous marriage and period of mourning. If he thought the timeline was scandalous, he kept it to himself. On the ride back to the ranch, Thomas was quiet. Penelope finally asked what he was thinking. "I am worried you felt pressured back there, that I pushed you into this." "You did not push me anywhere I did not want to go. I meant what I said, Thomas. I want this. I want you. Even though people will talk, especially then. Let them talk. We know the truth of our feelings. That is what matters." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "I do not know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I am grateful for it every day. You gave me water when I needed it most. You gave me kindness when I had none. You gave me a reason to keep living. I should be thanking you. Then we are even." The 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Penelope sewed her dress by lamplight in the evenings while Thomas worked on repairing and improving the house. He built new shelves in the kitchen, fixed the leaky spot in the roof, and even constructed a proper bathing tub as a wedding gift. They were building a home together, piece by piece, and every addition felt like a promise. The nightmares that had plagued Thomas since the war began to ease. He told her it was because he no longer felt alone, because having her there made the darkness less frightening. Penelope understood. Her own grief over Robert's death had transformed into something more manageable, no longer a sharp pain but a dull ache. She would always regret that they had not loved each other the way married people should, but she no longer felt guilty about moving forward with her life. They talked about everything during those weeks. Thomas told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother who had died coughing blood, about her father who had gambled away everything they had. They shared their fears and hopes, their dreams for the future. "I want children," Penelope said one evening as they sat on the porch. "I do not know if that is something you want, but I feel like I should tell you." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "I always thought I would have children someday. But then the war happened, and afterward, I could not imagine bringing a child into a world that could be so cruel. I did not want to love something that much and risk losing it." And now I think maybe the world is not all cruelty. Maybe there is beauty and love too, and maybe children born into that would have a chance at happiness. He turned to her, his expression serious. If we are blessed with children, I would welcome them, boy or girl, one or many. We will love them and teach them and do our best to prepare them for whatever comes. That is all anyone can do. The wedding took place on a clear October morning with the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. They rode into Stillwater together, Penelope wearing her new dress of deep green fabric that brought out the color of her eyes. Thomas had bathed and shaved and put on his best shirt, and he looked handsome enough to make her heart race. The church was small but tidy, and a surprising number of townspeople had turned out for the ceremony. Penelope recognized Henry from the general store, along with several other faces she had seen on their previous visit. Reverend Matthews stood at the front, his Bible open, waiting. Thomas and Penelope stood before him, hands clasped, and the words of the ceremony washed over them like a blessing. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes when Thomas said his vows, his voice steady and clear. I, Thomas Calloway, take you, Penelope Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and care for you all the days of my life. I promise to give you everything I have and everything I am. You came to me asking for water, and I gave you the spring. But that is nothing compared to what I want to give you now. I give you my heart, my home, my world. Everything I have is yours. Her own vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. I, Penelope Morgan, take you, Thomas Calloway, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to build a life with you, to share your burdens and your joys. You saved my life that day in the desert, but you have done so much more than that. You have given me hope and love and a future. I give you myself, freely and completely, for all the days we have. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope forgot they had an audience. There was applause, and people came forward to congratulate them, and Henry pressed a bottle of wine into Thomas's hands as a wedding gift. They stayed in town just long enough to be polite, then rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Everything looked different somehow, gilded with the golden light of late afternoon, and Penelope felt like she was seeing it all for the first time. This was her home now. Thomas was her husband. She had a place in the world again, but more than that, she had chosen this place, chosen this life, chosen this love. That night they consummated their marriage with a sweetness and passion that left Penelope breathless. Thomas was gentle but ardent, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished. It was so different from the perfunctory couplings she had experienced with Robert that she almost wept from the sheer emotion of it. Afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Thomas traced patterns on her bare shoulder with his fingertips. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I have ever been, happier than I thought possible. Good, that is all I want, your happiness. Then you have succeeded. Though I think this is a partnership, Thomas, your happiness matters just as much as mine. I am happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I am genuinely happy. You did that, Penny. You brought light back into my life." She turned in his arms to face him, kissing him softly. "Then we are both lucky. We found each other when we needed it most. Do you think that is what this is? Luck, or maybe something more, like fate? I do not know if I believe in fate, but I believe we made choices that led us here. I chose to walk toward your ranch that day instead of lying down and dying in the desert. You chose to help me instead of sending me away. We chose each other. Maybe that is better than fate. Maybe choosing is what makes it real. I like that." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I choose you, Penny Calloway, today and every day after. And I choose you. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the quiet contentment of knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. The next months were an education in married life and ranching. Winter came to New Mexico, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that turned the desert into something strange and beautiful. Penelope learned how to care for cattle in harsh weather, how to break ice on water troughs, how to fortify the barn against storms. Thomas taught her everything with patience, and she was a quick study. They developed routines and rhythms unique to them. Thomas would wake early and start the fire while Penelope made coffee. They would work together through the morning, break for lunch, then continue until the sun set. Evenings were for sitting by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. And nights were for loving each other, learning each other's bodies and preferences, building intimacy. In January, Penelope realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another week, then two, afraid to hope. When a month had passed and there was still nothing, she finally told Thomas. He was mucking out a stall in the barn when she found him, and the words just tumbled out. "I think I might be pregnant." Thomas froze, the pitchfork still in his hands. Slowly, he set it aside and turned to face her. "You think or you know, I think. It has been 6 weeks since my last monthly, and I have been feeling strange, tired, a little sick in the mornings. I could be wrong. But you do not think you are. No, I do not think I am wrong." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had that day after his fall. But this time, he was laughing, and she was laughing too, and when he set her down, they were both crying. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "An actual baby. Are you happy, truly?" "Happy. Penny, I am terrified and thrilled and so full of joy I could burst. We are going to be parents. We are going to have a child who is part of both of us. How could I be anything but happy?" She had worried, despite their earlier conversation, that a baby so soon might be too much. But seeing the pure elation on Thomas's face erased all her doubts. They wanted this. They were ready for this. As winter melted into spring, Penelope's belly began to swell. Thomas became comically overprotective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. She humored him because his concern came from love, but she also continued doing most of her regular tasks. Women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was not about to become helpless just because she was pregnant. They made another trip to Stillwater in March, where the general store owner's wife, a practical woman named Martha, confirmed the pregnancy and gave Penelope advice about what to expect. Martha had 6 children of her own, and she was a wealth of information about everything from morning sickness to preparing for the birth. "You are going to want someone with you when the time comes," Martha said bluntly. "Thomas is a good man, but he will be useless. They always are. I can come out to your ranch when you get closer, stay a few days to help." Penelope accepted gratefully. She had been wondering how they would manage, so far from town and from help. Having Martha there would make everything easier. The baby came on a hot night in late August, almost exactly a year after Penelope had first stumbled onto Thomas's ranch. Martha had arrived a week earlier, and it was good she had, because the labor was long and difficult. Penelope labored through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when she thought she might die from the pain. Thomas stayed nearby, holding her hand when she needed it, retreating when Martha barked at him to give them space. He looked pale and terrified, and Penelope might have found it funny if she had not been in so much agony. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, the baby came. A boy, red-faced and squalling, with a surprising amount of dark hair. Martha cleaned him up and placed him in Penelope's arms, and the world seemed to stop. "You have a son," Martha said, smiling. "A fine, healthy boy." Thomas approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the baby. His face went through a dozen expressions in as many seconds: shock, awe, love, fear. Then he reached out one finger and touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers closed around it instinctively, and Thomas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel, after Thomas's father. Samuel Thomas Calloway, born August 23, 1878. He was a hungry baby, always wanting to nurse, and he had a surprisingly loud cry for something so small. But when he slept, curled against Penelope's chest, he was the most peaceful thing she had ever seen. Parenthood was harder than either of them had anticipated. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive. But it was also more rewarding. Every smile Samuel gave them, every new sound he made, every milestone felt like a miracle. Thomas was a devoted father. He would walk the floor with Samuel for hours when the baby was fussy, singing lullabies in his terrible voice. He made a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters. He talked to Samuel constantly, narrating everything he did as if the baby could understand. "You are going to be a rancher someday," Thomas would say as he carried Samuel around outside. "See those cattle? Those will be yours, and this land, all of it. We are building this for you, little man. You and whatever brothers or sisters come after you." Penelope would watch them together and feel her heart might burst from love. This was everything she had never known she wanted: a home, a family, a partner who cherished her, a child who depended on them both. The years flowed by like water, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their son. Samuel took his first steps on a spring morning, wobbling across the kitchen toward Thomas with his arms outstretched. He said his first word, "Papa," which made Thomas insufferable for days. He grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy, always wanting to follow his father around and help with the ranch work. When Samuel was 3, Penelope became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in April of 1882 she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose, after Penelope's mother, and she was as different from Samuel as night from day. Where he had been loud and demanding, Rose was quiet and content. She would lie in her cradle for hours, watching the world with solemn dark eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to hold her constantly, to show her his toys, to tell her about everything he saw. Thomas and Penelope supervised carefully, but they let him help care for her. It was important that he feel included, that he understand being a big brother was a privilege. The ranch prospered. Thomas expanded the herd, added more horses, and even built a second barn. The work was endless but satisfying. Penelope handled the books, keeping track of expenses and profits, and she was good at it. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and that was more than many people could say. Stillwater grew too. More families moved into the area, drawn by the availability of land and the promise of opportunity. A school was built, and when Samuel turned 6, he began attending classes 3 days a week. He was bright and learned quickly, and the teacher, Miss Anderson, said he had a gift for numbers. Life was not without its challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers. They lost cattle to disease and predators. The work was physically demanding, and there were days when both Thomas and Penelope fell into bed exhausted. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When Rose was 2 and Samuel was 5, Penelope became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was difficult from the start. She was sick constantly, and the baby seemed to sit wrong, causing pain in her back and hips. Martha came out to check on her regularly, and there was worry in the older woman's eyes. "This baby is positioned oddly," Martha said after one examination. "We need to be careful. You should rest more, Penny. Let Thomas handle the heavy work." Penelope tried, but resting did not come naturally to her. She was used to being active, to contributing. Still, she scaled back her activities, focusing on caring for the children and managing the household while Thomas took over more of the ranch work. The baby came early, in the middle of a snowstorm in February. It was a terrifying birth, with the baby breech and Penelope losing a dangerous amount of blood. Martha worked frantically, and Thomas paced outside, unable to help. At one point, Martha had to call him in to hold Penelope down while she turned the baby, and the sound of his wife's screams nearly broke him. But finally, after hours of struggle, the baby was born. Another boy, smaller than the others had been, but breathing and crying. Martha wrapped him quickly and handed him to Thomas while she tended to Penelope, who had passed out from exhaustion and blood loss. "She will be all right," Martha said, though she looked shaken. "But this cannot happen again, Thomas. Another pregnancy might kill her. You understand?" Thomas nodded, clutching the baby to his chest. He looked down at the tiny face, then over at Penelope, pale and still in the bed. The joy of a new child was overshadowed by the terror of almost losing his wife. They named the baby James, and he was a fighter from the start. He was small but fierce, determined to keep up with his older siblings despite being years younger. Samuel doted on him, and Rose treated him like her personal doll, always wanting to help feed and dress him. Penelope recovered slowly from the difficult birth. It took months before she felt like herself again, and Martha's warning echoed in her mind. She and Thomas talked about it one night after the children were asleep. "I do not want to lose you," Thomas said, holding her close. "3 children is a blessing. We do not need more if it puts you at risk." "I know. I do not want to leave you either, or them." She looked over at the cradle where James slept. "3 is enough, more than enough. We have a family, Thomas, a real family. We do, and I am grateful for every moment of it." As the children grew, they each developed distinct personalities. Samuel was responsible and serious, always wanting to do things right. He took to ranching naturally, and by the time he was 10, he could do the work of a grown man. Rose was gentle and creative, always drawing pictures or making up stories. She loved animals and had a special way with horses. James was the wild one, fearless and impulsive, always getting into trouble and making his parents' hair turn gray. The house Thomas had built for himself alone became loud with the sounds of family. Children's laughter, arguments over toys, the patter of feet running through rooms. Penelope would sometimes stop in the middle of a task and just listen, marveling at how different her life was from what she had imagined that day she walked into the desert. Thomas thrived as a father. The loneliness that had marked him when Penelope first met him was completely gone. He was patient with the children, teaching them everything he knew about the land and the animals. He told them stories about the war, edited for young ears, and about how their mother had come to him seeking water. "She was the bravest person I had ever met," he would say. "Walking through the desert alone, not knowing if she would survive. And when I gave her water, she looked at me with those eyes, and I knew my life had just changed forever." "That is not how I remember it," Penelope would interject. "You looked at me like I was a ghost. You did look half dead." Exactly my point. The children loved hearing the story of how their parents met. Samuel would ask Thomas to tell it over and over, and each time, Thomas would add little details. How the sun had been at just the right angle to make Penny's hair glow. How she had been so polite even though she was dying of thirst. How he had known, somehow, that she was meant to be there, In 1890, when Samuel was 12, Rose was 8, and James was 6, the ranch had its best year yet. The cattle brought good prices, and Thomas was able to hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work. It meant he had more time to spend with the family, and they took advantage of it. They had picnics by the spring. The whole family spread out on blankets while the children played in the water. They rode out together to check the herds. Even little James perched in front of Thomas on the saddle. They went to town for the Independence Day celebration, and the children ran wild with the other kids while Thomas and Penelope danced under the stars. Those were golden years, full of laughter and love and the simple satisfaction of work well done. Penelope would look at Thomas across the dinner table, surrounded by their children, and think about how close she had come to missing all of this. If she had died in that desert, if she had stayed with the wagon train, if Thomas had turned her away, any of those things could have happened and this life would not exist, but they had found each other. Against all odds, in the middle of nowhere, 2 lonely people had collided and built something beautiful. As the children moved into their teenage years, new challenges emerged. Samuel became interested in a girl in town, which led to complicated conversations about courting and respect. Rose declared she wanted to be an artist, which worried Penelope because it was not a practical profession. James got into a fight at school and came home with a black eye and a suspension, requiring Thomas to have a serious talk about consequences. But they navigated it all together, as they had navigated everything. Thomas and Penelope presented a united front, supporting each other even when they disagreed about the best approach. They had learned over the years that partnership meant compromise, that love meant working through problems instead of avoiding them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Penelope with a new addition to the house. He had been working on it secretly for months, enlisting the children's help to keep it hidden. It was a sunroom, with large windows that looked out over the rangeland and the mountains beyond. Inside, he had placed a comfortable chair, a small table, and shelves for books. "You are always doing for everyone else," he said as he showed it to her. "I wanted you to have a place that is just yours, where you can sit and read or just think. A place to be Penny, not just Mama or the rancher's wife." She cried, of course. Thomas's thoughtfulness still had the power to undo her after all these years. She kissed him in front of the children, who groaned dramatically, and he laughed and kissed her back. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together in the new sunroom and watched the stars emerge. The same stars that had been there the night they first admitted their love, the night they married, the nights their children were born. Constant and eternal, like the love they shared. "Thank you," Penelope said, leaning against Thomas's shoulder, "for all of this, for giving me a life I never dared to dream about. Thank you for accepting it, for choosing to stay all those years ago. I was so afraid you would leave, that you would realize you could do better than a lonely cowboy in the middle of nowhere. There is no better. There is only you and me and what we have built together. I asked you for water and you gave me everything. I would do it again, 1,000 times over. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penny Calloway. And you are mine." They sat in comfortable silence, and Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from desperation and grief to love and family, from strangers to partners, from surviving to truly living. The years continued to roll forward, as years do. Samuel grew into a fine young man and eventually married the girl he had been courting since he was 15. They built a small house on the edge of the ranch property, and Samuel took over more and more of the daily operations. He had his father's steadiness and his mother's head for business, and the ranch continued to prosper under his guidance. Rose did become an artist, much to everyone's surprise. She started by painting scenes of the ranch and the desert, and her work caught the eye of a gallery owner who passed through Stillwater. He offered to represent her, and soon Rose's paintings were selling in Santa Fe and even as far as San Francisco. She traveled some, but she always came back to the ranch. It was her home, the place that inspired her art. James was the wanderer. When he turned 18, he announced he was joining the cavalry, wanting to see more of the world than just New Mexico. It broke Penelope's heart a little, but she understood the need to forge his own path. Thomas understood too, and he gave James his blessing along with advice about staying safe and true to himself. As Thomas and Penelope moved into middle age, then beyond, the ranch remained the center of their world. Samuel and his wife gave them grandchildren, and the house filled with new life. Rose came home between art shows and filled the walls with paintings. James visited when he could, full of stories about his adventures. Thomas's hair turned silver, and his face developed deep lines from years of squinting into the sun. But his eyes were still that remarkable blue-green, and when he looked at Penelope, she still felt like a young woman in love for the first time. Her own hair turned gray, and her hands developed the rough spots and calluses of a lifetime of hard work. But Thomas still held those hands like they were precious, still kissed her good night every evening without fail. They were sitting on the porch one evening in the summer of 1902, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. They were both in their 60s now, grandparents many times over, but the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, tempered by time and experience. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to California? You could have had a different life." Penelope looked at him in genuine surprise. "How can you even ask that? This is the only life I want, the only life I have ever wanted since the day I met you. I just wonder sometimes if you feel like you missed out on something." "Thomas Calloway, listen to me. That day I walked onto your ranch, I was lost. I had nothing. No future, no hope, no reason to keep going. You gave me water, yes, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me a home. How could I regret any of that? You gave me the same things. I was just existing before you came, surviving but not living. You made me want to live again." She reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlocking in the familiar way they had 1,000 times before. "Then we saved each other, and we built a good life. Look at what we have, Thomas. 3 children who are happy and healthy, grandchildren who visit and fill this place with laughter, a ranch that provides for us and for Samuel's family. We did that together. We did." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I love you, Penny. Just as much as I did that day I fell off the barn roof and told you so. More even. I did not know it was possible to love someone more with each passing year, but I do. I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the horses dozing in the barn. It was peaceful in a way that spoke of contentment, of a life well lived. The years that followed were gentle to them. They slowed down, letting Samuel and his sons handle most of the physical labor while they offered advice and wisdom. They spent mornings having coffee on the porch, afternoons reading or doing light chores, evenings surrounded by family. It was a good way to age, surrounded by love and the fruits of their labor. Thomas died on a spring morning in 1908. It was peaceful in his sleep with Penelope beside him. He was 73 years old. They had been married for 30 years, together for 31. Penelope held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart shattered, she was grateful he had not suffered. The funeral was well attended. The entire town of Stillwater came, along with people from neighboring ranches. Everyone had a story about Thomas, about his kindness, or his integrity, or his willingness to help a neighbor in need. Samuel gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about his father's strength and love. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, near the spring that had made everything possible. Penelope stood by the grave long after everyone else had left, looking out over the land they had worked together. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for giving me your world. I will treasure it always." She lived another 6 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, content with the love she had known. She spent her days in the sunroom Thomas had built for her, reading and watching the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel's care. Rose visited often, and James came home after retiring from the cavalry. They all took turns staying with her, making sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. On a warm August evening in 1914, Penelope passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 78 years old. In her hand was a small, worn piece of paper that Samuel found afterward. On it, in Thomas's handwriting, were the words, "You came seeking water, and I gave you the spring and my entire world. I would do it again 1,000 times." They buried her next to Thomas on the hill, their graves marked with simple stones. The spring continued to flow, feeding the ranch and sustaining the generations that came after. The house still stood, expanded and improved but recognizable. And the love story of Thomas and Penny Calloway became legend in Stillwater, the tale of two lonely people who found each other in the desert and built an empire of the heart. Samuel continued to run the ranch with the same dedication his parents had shown. He told his children and grandchildren about the day their grandmother had stumbled onto the property, half dead from thirst and sunstroke. How their grandfather had given her water and fallen in love. How they had built everything from nothing, sustained by the spring and each other. Rose painted a portrait of her parents from memory, showing them as they had been in their prime. Thomas strong and sun bronzed, Penny smiling with her hand in his. The painting hung in the ranch house for generations, a reminder of where it all began. James named his first daughter Penelope, carrying on his mother's name. She grew up to be as strong and determined as her grandmother, and she eventually took over a section of the ranch property, proving that the Calloway spirit ran true. The spring never ran dry, just as Thomas had promised all those years ago. It flowed constant and clear, a source of life in the harsh desert. In times of drought, neighbors would come asking for water, and the Calloways always shared, remembering the day Penelope had come seeking the same. The ranch remained in the family for over 100 years, passed down through the generations. Each owner added their own touches, but they all maintained the core of what Thomas and Penelope had built. The land was worked with respect, the water was shared with those in need, and the story of the lonely cowboy and the woman seeking water was told to every child born into the family. In time, the barn where Thomas had fallen was rebuilt, but they saved a beam from the original structure. It hung in the house, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from accidents and near misses. That love can bloom in unexpected moments and unlikely places. The town of Stillwater grew over the decades, becoming more than just a few buildings on a dusty road. But it never forgot the Calloway family and their contribution to the community. There was a park named after Thomas, who had donated water to the town during the terrible drought of 1895. There was a scholarship fund in Penelope's name for young women seeking education. The Wild West of 1877, when Penelope had first walked into the desert, became history. The frontier was settled, the territories became states, and the world changed in ways no one could have predicted. But the essential human needs remained the same: water, shelter, love, connection. Thomas and Penelope had found all of that in each other. Two people who might have missed each other entirely, whose lives intersected for a moment and then entwined forever. She had asked for water, the most basic necessity of life. He had given her that and so much more, pouring out his entire world into her cupped hands. And she had treasured it, nurtured it, helped it grow into something neither of them could have created alone. In the end, their love story was simple. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just two people choosing each other every single day. Working side by side, raising children, building a life from dust and determination and the steady flow of spring water. It was the kind of love that sustained, that endured, that grew richer with time. The spring still flows on that New Mexico ranch, cool and clear and constant. The land is still green in patches, still supporting cattle and horses and the people who tend them. And on the hill overlooking it all, two simple stones mark the final resting place of Thomas and Penelope Calloway, together even in death as they were in life. Their great-great-grandchildren visit sometimes, bringing flowers and standing quietly by the graves. They listen as their parents tell the story, and they understand that they exist because two lonely people found each other in the wilderness. Because a woman asked for water, and a man gave her everything. Because love, real love, has the power to transform not just two lives but generations. That is the legacy of the lonely cowboy and the woman who came seeking water. Not wealth or fame, but family and love and a life lived fully. In the harsh beauty of the New Mexico desert, under the endless sky, they found their forever. And that spring, that precious source of life, continues to flow, a testament to what they built together and the love that made it all possible.